KWST. Justin, go.
Thanks, John. So we just had a wonderful series of talks on exoplanets. Now we're going to switch gears entirely and talk about AGN. So my name is Justin Kader. I'm a postdoc at UC Irvine, working with Vivian Yu on AGN feedback in local universe star-forming galaxies. So it's a privilege to be able to present my research to you all here, so thanks very much. And thanks for sticking around till almost the very end. I really appreciate that. I'd like to thank the Keck scientists and staff members, particularly the KCRM commissioning team, some of whom are here. Nick, Rosalie, thanks so much. This work wouldn't be possible without your contributions. So the project that we're kind of just setting out at now, and I'm going to present some of our preliminary results, the project aims to combine Keck and JWST for a synergistic set of observations, high resolution, wide field observations of AGN outflows to get a better understanding of when and under what circumstances AGN contribute significant feedback to their host galaxies. So what is AGN feedback and why do we care? So AGN feedback describes the multiple ways that that the accretion energy of a feeding supermassive black hole couples to the ISM of the host galaxy, removing and heating gas and regulating the growth of the host galaxy and the black hole itself. So it's important for a number of reasons. Two of the most important are here. Prescient examples are here. So, for example, without AGN feedback, cosmological simulations tend to overproduce galaxies at the high mass end of the galaxy mass distribution. And so, these cosmological simulations require AGN to suppress, to quench the star formation, to prevent the formation of overmassive galaxies. Also, AGN feedback is a critical ingredient, possibly serving as the physical basis of the M-sigma relation, and so an important piece in understanding black hole host galaxy coevolution. Okay, so one of the key challenges is that simulations aren't able to simultaneously resolve AGN accretion and outflow physics at the same time as large-scale cosmology. So there's a reliance on prescriptive approaches. So in cosmological simulations, when you're looking at galaxy evolution, you have to sort of paint on the AGN feedback. And so modelers have to rely on AGN scaling relations from observations to decide when to turn on AGN feedback and how powerful that AGN feedback should be. So here's a couple scaling relations here. And so it's critically important to understand the scatter, the slope, and the offset of these scaling relations. But in order to do that the right way, you require a multi-wavelength approach where you have a full accounting of all the phases of the outflowing medium, so the ionized gas, the neutral, the molecular gas, and as well as being able to observe over the entire extent of these outflows. So if you're not looking at all the phases of matter in the outflow, and you're not looking at the full spatial extent of the outflow, you're going to get the mass wrong. And also you need to spatially resolve some of these things to be able to account for the mass at smaller scales. And if you don't do all these things, you can be off in your estimates by, for example, several orders of magnitude in the mass outflow rate, which can contribute, biases and significant scatter in those scaling relations that I just showed. So where do we look for AGN outflows in the universe? So these can be found in radio galaxies, quasars, Seyfert galaxies, ultraluminous infrared galaxies. So we're focusing on ULIRGs for several reasons. So unlike radio galaxies and quasars, these are at low redshift, so we're able to actually resolve them at the spatial scales that we're interested in order to look at the outflows at all relevant spatial scales. Unlike Seyfert galaxies, there's actually a higher incidence of multi-phase AGN outflows in these types of galaxies, probably owing to their merger activity and this abundance of plenty of dust and gas in these systems that feed the black holes. As an added bonus, ULIRGs in the local universe are analogs of massive active galaxies at cosmic noon, so understanding feedback in these types of galaxies is important for understanding supermassive black hole host galaxy coevolution at the peak epoch of galaxy growth. Okay, so our sample consists of 15 ULIRGs and LIRGs at low redshift, below 0.05. And so you can see the postage stamps of these here. So these were selected because they show hints of shocked molecular outflows based on H2 to bracket gamma near-infrared line ratios from, for example, OSIRIS observations. And they're also selected because they have, or they're expected to have, observations from James Webb. And so here's the source list here. The sources span a wide range in host properties, for example, the galaxy infrared luminosity, AGN fraction, so the contribution of the AGN to the total luminosity of the galaxy. And so it's important to have this wide range in properties to test the impacts of AGN feedback in a wide variety of environments. Okay, so while James Webb targets the dust-obscured emission from the inner kiloparsec or so region of the host galaxies, Keck will probe the galactic scale optical emission. So in particular, we're using KCWI, obviously a wide field optical IFU. It's optimized for low surface brightness emission. So it's ideal for being able to identify the faint diffuse optical emission from ionized gas that might be expected in the very outskirts of ionized outflows. And then on the James Webb side, we're using MURI. It's a mid-infrared IFU, ideal for observing optically obscured emission from buried AGN. Okay, so having provided some background on the topic and motivating, hopefully, the project, I'd like to go into some of our preliminary results. The first object that we observed, that we got observations from James Webb with, was VV340. So we got these observations with James Webb at the end of March this year. We observed it with KCWI in April 2022. And then again, thanks to the commissioning team, again in July of this year with KCWI and KCRM. And so just a quick primer on the source. So it's a low redshift LIRG, consists of a pair of galaxies. They're both late type disk galaxies, as you can see. One's edge on, one's face on. The pair are separated by a projected distance of about 30 kiloparsecs, and they're at an early stage of interaction, possibly before first pericenter passage. VV340 North is the focus of the study here, or the focus of our observations. And it itself is a LIRG emitting 90% of the infrared flux of the whole system. So one of the first questions, therefore, since it's so IR bright, is does it contain an AGN? So in the optical, the answer is we don't see indications. So if there is an AGN, it's highly dust obscured. And so in the early 2000s, there was Spitzer IRS spectra taken of the nucleus of this galaxy that actually did reveal bright neon 5 coronal line emission from the nucleus. So this line can only form in the presence of a very hard ionizing continuum. So it's very strong evidence for the presence of an AGN. Additionally, the Chandra spectrum shows bright emission lines in the soft bands, and there's also an excess at higher energies. So again, another source of evidence for an AGN that's dust obscured. Okay, so turning now to our data, I'll show the MURI data first. So the red box shows the field of view for the IFU. Extends out to about 3 kiloparsec, and so the total extracted spectrum is shown here. So we have bright fine structure lines. We have H2 row vibrational lines. We have some PA bands, some silicate absorption, and a very steep mid-infrared continuum. So these are sort of circumstantial evidence for, again, the presence of a dust-buried AGN. But when we focus in on the 14 micron regime, we reveal a whoppingly bright neon 5 line. This is extracted from this 1 arcsecond region shown in the black. So this replicates the Spitzer result and pretty much confirms the presence of an AGN in the system. So having confirmed the presence of an AGN, we were interested in putting numbers on the AGN bolometric luminosity and mass accretion rate. And we can do that directly using the mid-infrared line fluxes, which have been shown to correlate well with other bolometric indicators like X-ray flux, X-ray luminosity rather, and as well as correlating well with reverberation mapped black hole masses. So happily, we can just take our mid-infrared line fluxes, primarily from the coronal lines, which don't suffer from contamination from star formation, and get good numbers on these, which are obviously important for putting any outflows into context. So we have some way of describing the central engine, its accretion rate, et cetera. Okay, so obviously we're interested in looking for outflows. So to that end, we mapped the 14 brightest mid-infrared lines with MIRI, and those are shown here in order of increasing ionization potential. And one of the things that we noticed that was very interesting is that at lower ionization potential, you see bright emission along the star-forming disk of the galaxy. But as you transition to higher ionization potential, there's this really interesting extraplanar emission at high velocities. Particularly in the coronal lines, we see the same thing, extending out to at least the field of view of the instrument. So that's 3 kiloparsecs. So our interpretation here is that this is a coronal line ionized outflow powered by the AGN. And one of the interesting things to note is that we think this might be the most extended coronal line region observed in the local universe, surpassed only by observations of high redshift quasars. Okay, so we characterized the properties of this outflow. We assumed a biconical geometry, and we directly measured the electron density using the Neon 5 24 to 14 micron line ratio. And from that, we get an outflow rate of about 11 solar masses per year and associated kinetic power of 10 to the 42 ergs per second. Okay, so I think all the James Webb stuff is pretty cool, but I think the real cool stuff is when we look at the KCWI data, which I'll show next. So we mosaicked the KCWI instrument over about a square arc minute field of view. It took about an hour, but we got some, okay, and let me just say that the green here is optical broadband HST, and then the red here is the coronal line 14 micron. And here in blue, we're showing the O3 emission. So we see this remarkable large-scale structure in the collisionally excited lines, so O2 and O3. And so they form a pair of these bright kiloparsec scale filamentary nebulae. We do see some recombination line emission in these nebulae, but it's much fainter. In fact, the O3 to H beta ratio is quite high. And it's actually inconsistent with stellar photoionization. So this gas is either shock ionized or photoionized by the AGN continuum. Okay, so one of the most remarkable things still is that it's so closely aligned with the coronal line outflow. So the natural question is, okay, is this gas part of that outflow? So we looked at the kinematics of that gas and compared it to a rotation model. So along the star-forming disk, it's well aligned, and along the filaments, it shows non-circular velocities, showing that it's probably part of the outflow. And the last thing I'll show is the radio data in the white contours, where we see this crazy S-shaped jet, which indicates precession of an AGN-powered jet. And the power in the jet is an order of magnitude higher than the outflow kinetic power, which suggests that it's actually kinetically pushing this gas outward as it rotates every 300,000 years, since we fit a 3D model to the 6 gigahertz continuum image. And it aligns very well with this large-scale outflow. And so we also think this might be the first time we see this kind of jet activity in this type of host. And so hopefully the case of EV340 demonstrates the importance of taking a wide field, multi-scale approach with different facilities to look at these AGN outflows. So thanks. I'll take questions.
Next question. Actually, you should take that. I'm going to take this.